Hello, happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. Hello and welcome. So, tonight we are getting back into The Mythical Origin of the Egyptian Temple by E.A.E. And yeah, just bear with me because I've been doing some major detoxing and it's just like so I got some stuffiness that we're working through. So, off we go now. We're going right into chapter 14 today, and it's entitled History of the Primeval Temples of the Sun God. Okay, let's do it to it. Let me get my foot all tucked in. There are no good reasons for assuming that the first solar temple was also founded on a payland. This payland, in which the sun god was believed to have settled down first, so far as we are aware from the Edfu tradition, bears the name Island of Fury. The Island of Fury was not the original plot of land that emerged on the edges of the Island of Creation, but on the contrary, this payland was a secondary creation, a land which was believed to have originated after the falcon was established in his own domains. In view of these facts, it is natural that the secondarily created paylands had their own tradition concerning the origin of their temples. But nothing has been preserved from the history of the early mansions, which is HWT, that were founded there by Tannin and the Falcon. The narrative is solely concerned with the period of the fight and with the subsequent development of the sacred place that was created in the BWTPY, the place first one. Hey, DN, welcome in. Good to see you, man. Awesome. Happy St. Patty's. The antecedents of the foundation of the first solar temple are very different from those connected with the first mansion of the god, the Temple of the Falcon in Wetchesset Neater. This has already been seen in the study of the characteristics of the site of the first enclosure to be created. To outline only briefly the main differences which have been noticed in the history of origin of these two temples, it may be recalled that the first solar temple did not originate on the private domain of the sun god, on a land specially created for him, but in a region which was first occupied by Tannin and the Falcon. The site of the solar temple does not show obvious funerary associations. No emphasis is laid on what was in the past and died. There is no evidence of an act of revivification to be performed on the site with the view to restoring the former sacred nature of the land. There is no allusion to a direct connection with the process of the creation of the earth. Moreover, the tradition concerning the deity pillar as a pre-existing sacred object enshrined in situ is definitely foreign to this myth. It is clear that the solar temple was founded first and developed on a site that was, in its essential nature, a place for crushing, which is T-TITI, or rather BW-TITI, where the enemies of the god were killed. It is therefore evident that the origin of the growth of the first solar temple was associated with other ideas than the history of the temple in Wetchesset Neater, and that it was, in all probability, of a later date, created at a somewhat more advanced stage of the primeval age than the of the Falcon. A hint of this theory was seen in the title of the myth about the solar temple, which we find in the text of the Pure Ambulatory, and which stresses the idea of coming of the god to his mansion. Two other passages from the Edfu records can be quoted in support of our statements. The preamble to the set of the cosmogonical records alludes to a mythical episode in which Re is said to have arrived in a new region and invited an unspecified divinity to settle down, which is SNDM, beside him in the paylands of the Jeba. It is known that these lands were sacred to the Falcon and that he was the NDM lord there. Hence, this short text records only in a somewhat different manner the arrival of the sun god in the original domains of the Falcon. A further hint of a closely similar mythological situation can be seen in a scene of consecration of a mythical temple which is preserved on the walls of the Edfu temple. In this scene are seated figures of Horus, the Betitite, Hathor, and Ta, and facing them stand the king, Re, Harakte, Ta Tannen, Thoth, Seshat the Great, and 30 other gods. Re, Harakte, has one hand raised as he adores the great seat by its names and recites, O thou place in which Apopsis was pierced, as the Ka of the earth lives for me, I have made thee as my Perka, or Perka, in the mansion of the god, that I may hide myself within thee. I have also made thee as my great place in the first shrine. I made thy glories. I made beautiful thy places. I embellished thy chapels. Even the Hetep Nebui, the Amheret, the mansion of eternity, and the house of everlasting. Huh. Thereafter is added a gloss that in this way the temple acquired certain of its names. The remarkable fact is that here, Re Harakte is in a subordinate position, adorning not only the Beditite and his protector Ta, but also a temple called the Great Seat. He also speaks of constructing a part or parts of the temple within a previously existing building, which is described as the mansion of the god or the first shrine. Although this text is obviously affected by later editing, it is definitely connected with the series of cosmogonical records, and therefore it seems not unreasonable to suggest that the facts briefly noted above obtain their real significance as a record that the solar temple was built later and on land initially devoted to another god. The principal new fact that emerges from these allusions is that the temple, as an entity, was believed to have existed before the sun god. We suspect that the name SHMHNTY, or the sanctuary of the first one, may allude to shrines or enclosures existing before the foundation made in the place of the one, or it may describe the sacred building of the place of the first one, which Tannin and the falcon founded there before the sun god appeared in the Payland. Another feature distinctly different from the first myth is that before the sun god could himself lay claim to any part of the Island of Fury, it was necessary to fight against the snake, and only after the snake had been overthrown was the battlefield made into a sacred place by a rite described as the Purification, or TWR. Then, and only then, was it possible for the ancestor to arrive and settle down in the company of divine beings whose task was now to construct the mansion for the sun god. Examining the early part of the history of the Payland called Island of the Fury, we can see in this order of ideas the influence of another tradition. The tone of the narrative seems to change. It is seated in the first part of the third record that the ancestor was in the place which became the of the subsequent events. It is unlikely that he could remain in that place during the period of the fight. He was perhaps believed to have returned to his original place, in either his abstract or concrete form, after the place was cleansed in consecration of the fight, or rather, in consequence of the fight. We suspect that in the reference to the presence of the ancestor in the foundation ground of the enclosure of the sun god, there might be an allusion to the customs. Let's try again. So we suspect that in the reference to the presence of the ancestor in the foundation ground of the enclosure of the sun god, there might be an allusion to the customs of the early ages. Perhaps there was a custom to display the statue or the image of an ancestor god on the site where a sacred place was going to be founded. And this itself seems to be another hint of the theory that this mythical story refers to a somewhat later and more advanced stage of the mythical past. It is true that in the presence of the ancestor, described in this part of the narrative also as a M squiggly, a point of similarity can be seen to the history of the Temple of the Falcon. Moreover, the ancestor of the solar temple seems to be the maker of the substances, and therefore an earth god too. On the other hand, however, the function of the first solar temple does not appear to have been conceived, in the strict sense, as the revivification and restoration of the vanished domain of this form of the earth god. It is possible that the tradition follows another trend of thought. The presence of the ancestor was required on the site of the foundation with a view to ensuring and reinforcing the protection of the sacred place. This is already well known from the history of the domains of the foundation. Were the element of ancestry in this mythical story genuine, there would not be a stress on the episode settling down there together with the ancestor. We suspect that at this point, there are associated two traditions of distinctly different date. In the background of this episode is the belief in the origin of a sacred place in the BW-TPY, was the mansion of the god or the first shrine, I think. Place of the first one. That's what that is. The place of the first one. So, in the background of this episode is the belief in the origin of a sacred place in the place of the first one, the genuine resting place of the deceased earth god. This belief was most probably combined at a somewhat later date with the common tradition concerning the origin of the sacred enclosure in a battlefield where stress on ancestry was no longer natural, and therefore there was need of making an indirect reference. This might have been a procedure of a rather artificial order, such as, for instance, a procession in which the statue of the ancestor was laid into the site while magical spells of protection were uttered. For an analogy, it is of interest to refer to what happened in the Payland of Wetchesset where the image of the ancestor Heater-Her was carried before the falcon. We know that Heater-Her was not at home in this land, but his presence made the foundation possible. Emoji King, welcome in, dude. Awesome-o. Good to see you. Happy St. Patty's. I'm just drinking water right now. I had some tea earlier, though. Okay. Further differences from the way in which the first Temple of the Falcon was created can be seen in the procedures of fashioning the mansion in the later Paylands. The creation of the first solar temple does not start in erecting the seat of the god. Nothing equivalent to the perch of the falcon in this myth. Although the text is very brief and obscure in this part of the story, it is likely that following the initial rites, once more a magical rite of protection was performed, presumably by Tannen. Then the text seems to allude to a scene of encounter between Tannen and Rey, which is R-E, right? Isn't that cool? The constructors of the mythical temples, the builder gods with the sages, conducted by Tech and Seshat, then arrived on the scene in the presence of the ancestor and Tannen. After a ceremony of presenting some kind of unspecified offerings, the chief gods of the site went around in procession, and the foundation was laid out. Probably they were believed to walk around the boundaries of the foundation ground, and perhaps there is allusion to a ceremony which seems to have been also performed in the original Paylands. It is stated thereafter foundation of the enclosure was made in the presence of the eldest one of Wetchesset Neater, Tannen, the Ogdoad of Rey. This short list of deities is important for the history of the temple. It mentions the god of the first temple according to this tradition, who is described as a nameless god, save that he is qualified by the name WR, the eldest one. Then the text refers to the Ogdoad, who are completely unknown to the earlier episodes. This list seems to suggest the modification of the original version of the myth about the sacred settlement in the secondary Paylands under the influence of local beliefs and traditions. The order of the divine names in our document appears unusual, but it may be explained if we admit that the names of the Ogdoad and of Rey were incorporated in the original text at a somewhat later date, when the myth we are studying became known in the early cultist places of the sun god. If this surmise be accepted, there will be no doubt about our theory concerning the originality of the myth about the Temple of the Falcon. We incline to the opinion that originally this myth dealt with the creation of the subsidiary mansions for the origin god of Wetchesset-Neder, the WR, or Eldest One. After having become familiar to other religious centers of pre-dynastic Egypt, secondary mansions of the Falcon and Tannin came to be regarded as the earliest enclosures of the local god or gods. Their names might have been simply associated with those of the original occupiers of these mansions, just as we find in our document. This view may explain why, in the majority of texts concerned with the origin of sacred places, the fight against the enemy snake is described as the essential condition that enabled the god to make a settlement, a view to which we have referred. Ooh, both my ears just popped. That feels great. We may say that the Edfu evidence seems to illustrate the way in which the solar cult adopted the myth about the mansions of gods created in the secondary paylands. The view that the solar cult may have used as an explanation of the origin of its primeval enclosures, traditions originally connected with the sacred places of the falcon or of another god, seem illogical when we refer to the spell translated above. A further argument can be cited from the title introducing the description of the temple in Wetchesset-Neder. It is clearly stated that the construction of the mansion, which was originally made in Wetchesset-Neder, was made once again at a somewhat later stage of the primeval age in the presence of Re. It is therefore suggested that the description of the ground plan of that temple, as it is preserved in the Edfu record, reveals the final stage of the appearance of the original temple, and may eventually have been drawn according to a structure made in a place sacred to the sun god. Two important deductions can be made. It is inherently possible that at the beginning of the history of Egyptian temples, there was one unique type of temple which was constructed and reconstructed in many places of pre-dynastic Egypt, and that, secondly, the solar cult did not have its own type of structure. Evidently, early sacred enclosures were made on the pattern of somewhat earlier structures specific to sacred places other than those of the sun god, as, for instance, the original sacred places of the Eldest One. Yeah. You know what, too? This week I was looking at pictures of the Edfu temple. Holy majoli. I want to pull some up so that we can check it out together. It's, oh man, I hope to visit there. It's so cool. Okay, so let's see here. I just rebooted my computer before I went live and it all worked out like right down to the minute. So I have to pull it up again. Temple. Boom. Okay, images. Hey, give me some space here. Please? I'll just manhandle you, I guess. So, oh, so cool. I wonder if am I able to do I have to just show you one picture? I want to show you all these pictures. Is there a way to expand this on this page? I don't think so. Balls. That means I just have to pick one. Well, I'll show you the front of the temple. Let's see here. Open link. Open image in new tab. Oh, wait, that one's way too small. Let's try a different one. Don't. Is this one bigger? Not that much bigger. Let's see what it looks like on its own page. Not big enough. There's some that are huge, so because dang, where did I get into that I was able to scroll though? I got into this place where I was able to scroll through all these pictures. It was so cool. Flickr. Haha. Okay. Look, I can. Okay. I want to start with. Wait, I want to start with the front of the temple. Nah, that's inside. Hmm. Mother of pearls. Where you at? All these pictures are so cool, though. Okay, here's one. This front of the temple. Okay, so now I'm gonna share Temple of Horus and Edfu, Nile River. So back to StreamYard. Let's do some sharing. All right, present. Share screen. Edfu Temple. This one. Share. Look at that. Wow. The Edfu Temple. Dude. Okay, how do I zoom back out? There we go. Oh, juicy, juicy. Nile Holiday. Travel experts. Man, plus like oh wow. Look at that. Oh my gosh. Okay, wait. I'm going to go the other way though. This is so cool. Okay. Classic. The masculine and the feminine. Look at that inside. Look at all the text on the walls. Man, wouldn't it be something to approach this text and just understand it? That would be so cool. But like, you can even see the damage just on this. But look how long it's lasted even. And then, like in here and stuff, is this where it's just been eroded by time? Or did someone, because it looks like someone came in and just like chipped away it, right? And they were like defacing it. Wow. Hathor. When they have their left foot forward like that, it means spirituality. It's like the moon, it's the feminine nature. When they right foot forward, it means that they're coming from their masculine nature, the more physicality of things. Cool, right? Juicy. Man, it's huge too. I'm trying to like that. I think about where this is about 6 foot, like right here. When you're standing up against this thing, like below his beak is like 6 foot. Look at that. Where you enter, the other side of where you enter, I believe. And then all of these pillars too. This is that hypo style of architecture. It's like Greek and Roman. Man. Okay, back to StreamYard. Isn't that cool? Okay, I'm gonna unshare that. I'll remove, and then I'll get back into it. Take a sip. We may imagine, therefore, that the first sacred enclosure of the sun god was regarded as equal in its organization to the temple in Wetchesset-Neder. Consequently, the fourth record, concerned with the origin of the solar temple, describes the creation of the second primeval temple of the falcon. These secondarily created temples were not thought to have been constructed in exactly the same way as the original Wetchesset-Neder. We have already seen differences as regards the initial ceremony preceding the foundation. Another and essential difference is that the account of the origin of the Second Temple speaks definitely of a foundation ritual and gives clear evidence of the episode of the stretching the cord. This is the earliest allusion to it in our creation story. While referring to the creation of the Temple of the Falcon, it appears that this foundation rite replaced the WDBW, the episode in which the site of the enclosure was delimited. Since in the first story the foundation ground was believed to have been determined by the extent of an earlier sacred place, it is evident that later on there was no need of other special rites. On the contrary, the nature of the ground of the later enclosure seems to have required a procedure of a special order. It may be surmised that the later enclosure was of the same dimensions as the original one. This is confirmed by the numbers given in our texts, which indicate that the original great enclosure and that of the Second Temple were identical in space. There is no similarity in the following phases of construction. We have seen that the Temple of the Falcon grew phase by phase around the most sacred part of the area in which the perch of the falcon was. The account of the physical appearance of the solar temple tells us that the first act to follow the stretching the cord was the setting out of the outer enclosure wall, INB. It is therefore clear that the enclosure was erected before any other sacred building site on it, or rather, it it is therefore clear that the enclosure was erected before any other sacred building on the site. The narrative explains the reason of this action. The enclosure had the function of protecting the sacred area from the evil coming outside. Excuse me. It is evident that a construction that started in the erection of an enclosure. Oh, hiccups. Hey, Maria, good to see you. Welcome in. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Yeah. So good to see you. I hope you're having a wonderful week. And we're coming into the weekend. Oh, my goodness. Where am I? That was exciting. Bum, 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 bum. So yeah, okay, the narrative explains the reason of this action. The enclosure had the function of protecting the sacred area from evil coming from outside. It is evident that a construction that started in the erection of an enclosure was not made on the water's edge, but most probably on the mainland. There was no longer the sacred water that had the power of preventing the enemy from coming near the sacred area. Therefore, there was a need to find another means of protection. And these facts are only another argument in favor of the theory that now the records refer to a much later and more advanced stage of the primeval age. The account of the temple in Wetchesett Neater does not disclose any tradition which might eventually be connected with the outer enclosure. Here, on the contrary, the erection of the outer enclosure. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I think I skipped a line. Here, on the contrary, the erection of the outer enclosure is described as a mythological scene. Man, that's great. My ears keep popping. Ah, London. Oh my gosh, me too. Someone said something about that hopefully some of the Irish luck finds me today. And I was like, the Irish luck always finds me. It's in my blood. London, another place I'd love to visit one day. The builder gods are said to have established a square construction. Then all the other divine beings who were present celebrated a festivity. It is to be noted that the enclosure as a structural unit is here described by the term IFDW, which is unknown to the first myth. The description of the building and the setup of the solar temple is the most interesting and extended document known about the organization of the primitive temples. It is not possible at present, I think I just said president. It is not possible at present to give as precise a description of this solar temple as we have given of the Temple of the Falcon. The text gives us an equally detailed amount. Mother of pearls. Let's try again. The text gives us an equally detailed account of the solar temple with precise measurements in cubits. The narrative is so concise and cryptic that it is not yet possible to present a description of the temple as a whole that gives a satisfactory explanation of all the exceedingly puzzling dimensions which occur in a concise narrative. What is quite certain is that there was an outer enclosure measuring 400 cubits from south to north and 300 cubits from west to east, and that inside this vast enclosure was built a solar temple. It is also certain that the foundation of this enclosure represented the first step in the building of the temple, and that its foundation was an act by itself. There is no clear statement about the existence of an inner enclosure such as existed in connection with the Temple of the Falcon, but that such an inner enclosure must have existed seems to be a logical deduction from the facts. It seems probable that the temple consisted essentially of 3 units. Probably record hints at several subsequent stages of development of the solar temple, which in this vision, however, are presented as a composite whole. The study of the record permits us to discern them. Probably each unit reflects the aspect of a definite stage of development in the history of the solar mansion. The first unit to be built within the vast enclosure is described as a SH or sanctuary and measured 90 cubits from west by 20 cubits from south to north. It was probably divided into 3 rooms, each of which was 30 cubits by 20 cubits. If our suggestion that the Edfu record has preserved several succeeding stages of development is correct, this rectangular sanctuary would appear to be the earliest type of the cultus place of the sun god. We thus picture a vast enclosure enshrining one single building, the sanctuary, which comprised 3 cultus rooms. Such construction seems to have been the nucleus of the mansion of the sun god. No archaeological evidence can be cited to confirm this view. The second unit was a square structure erected to the south from the first sanctuary. It appears as though Tanin performed a magical rite before the foundation ground was laid out. It is certain that a new ceremony of stretching the cord was performed before the second unit was did. This is then described as a IFDW, or enclosure, being 90 cubits long and 110 cubits wide. It is not certain, however, whether an ambulatory separated this unit from the sanctuary, or whether its overall south to north dimensions included the 20 cubits of the north to south dimensions of the room, which is SH as well. It looks as though we have, at this stage, building to imagine a court with 3 rooms of 20 by 30 cubits along the north side. A construction of this type might then be the second stage in the development of the solar temple. The third period in the development seems to be the construction of various rooms and halls within this courtyard. This second unit seems to have had 2 cultus rooms also described as a sanctuary, rooms which were built from west to east within the courtyard. One of them bears the name HWTKNI, or Mansion of Valor. Valor. It appears that a hall was erected in front of them. In the remaining space between this hall and the front of the enclosing wall, there seem to have been built 2 other halls, presumably on the axis of the courtyard. The third unit is even more uncertain. It is possible that it was again a IFDW, or enclosure, an enclosure with an ambulatory 15 cubits wide. The joint measurement of all the 3 units is 240 cubits, but the width apparently varied. Therefore, as it is known that the north to south dimension of the second unit was 110 and is in addition to it, we have the 20 cubits of the first sanctuary. Results that the north to south dimension of the third enclosure must have been also 110 cubits. A gate seems to have led from the first hall of the second unit to the third one. The third unit seems to have had 3 sanctuaries described as SH, which were erected along the east wall. Possibly the same number of sanctuaries were constructed along the west wall. In the center between the eastern and western rows of sanctuary, there seemed to have been erected a of halls. Unfortunately, the description is very cryptic at this point. Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Wow! Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, this is so cool and weird. This is the first time. Thank you, Maria. I appreciate you tremendously. That is so special. My first super sticker. Oh my gosh, thank you. It's so cool. I just I just went through the whole process of the monetization with YouTube, and they accepted me and stuff, and wow, cool beans. Thank you very much. So cool. Wow. Wow, cool. Thank you. Man, I totally appreciate you. Thanks for showing the love. That is so cool. The essential features of this type of building are thus a rectangular sanctuary described as a SH room, which eventually might have been divided into three cultist chambers, then the square courtyard called IFDW. The way in which this type of sacred building developed into a composite whole shows no similarity to the original mansion once constructed in Wetchesett Neater. Nah, I mean, thank you so much for saying that, but like, it's like I feel your energy and just any because I like to give super chat people because I love them and like because I appreciate what they do and um yeah, so I mean, it's the energy thereof. Like I appreciate you so much, right? It could have been 1 cent. Thank you. So, constructed in Wetchesett Neater, it presents us with a much more complicated and elaborated there would be, therefore, little doubt that such a scheme of constructing a sacred enclosure must have evolved at a much later date, and that the development must cover a long period of time. Nowhere in the description is there any allusion to what might have been the seat of the god who was adored in this temple. Moreover, except for the opening words, nowhere is there evidence that the sun god was the first deity to be worshipped in this temple. It is certain, on the other hand, this complex of sacred buildings formed in its final stage two distinct mansions of the god, each of which measured 110 cubits from north to south. A single enclosing wall surrounded them at a distance from the main enclosure. This distance, however, is not specified in our text. Okay, I see where I am, but I think I'm gonna try and find a picture in the back here of the solar temple. Okay, juicy. Ah, there's so many pictures of the solar temple. Okay, so okay, I see where I am. First stage, right over here. And then this is second stage right here. This is dimensions that we're talking about right now. And then this is the third stage right here. Oh, hey, right here. Is it all in? Yeah. This is the fourth stage. And then this is the second type of solar temple, which I don't think we've really gone into detail about yet. Juicy. It's cool. Plus, I think a cubit is like 1.71828 feet. I think. Okay. So it is certain, on the other hand, that this complex of sacred buildings formed in its final stage two distinct mansions of the god. Oh, wait, yeah, I did read that whole thing. Okay, so the account seems to end with an allusion to yet another temple, which might have been included in the vast outer enclosure. This temple seems to have been founded to the west from the main complex. It was a temple of 90 by 105 cubits. Document, however, does not give further information as to its form and its eventual connection with the main temple. No name is given to this complex of sacred buildings, nor is there allusion to a tradition of a mythical locality where such a temple might have first been construction, might have been first constructed. It means the same thing, but I had those words mixed up. In the whole account, only one sanctuary has a specific name. This is the Mansion of Valor, a name which is identical with that of the main sanctuary. Steve, oh my gosh, happy St. Patrick's Day. Tooraloo-ra-loo-ra. Dude, wow, what a great stream with Phil. Oh, and I totally ordered his book, his new book, The Origin of Gnosis. I cannot wait to narrate that book, dude. Holy majoli. Yeah, I hope you're having a great week. I freaking love you. I'm so glad that you went live. I had been thinking about you. I had been missing you. It was great to see you. It was great to see Phil, which apparently his name is actually Philippe or Felipe. I struggled to find him online. But yeah, I appreciate you so much. So cool. Shoot, I should have marked my spot. Oh no, where am I? I got excited. I do that. The Mansion of Valor, a name which is identical with that of the main sanctuary of the temple in Wetchesset-Neder. At this name is used in the description of two temples of an entirely different tradition. It appears as though this name might have had, in the organization of the early temples, specific significance. Sweet dreams, DN. Awesome to see you, dude. We'll see you next time. The Edfu records proceed to give an account of yet another primitive temple of the sun god, which seems to have been constructed according to a similar scheme. The fifth Edfu record preserves the description of a temple of which the overall dimensions were 110 by 90 cubits. A decisive argument in favor of the view that this is a temple other than the complex of sacred buildings, which we have been outlining, is the fact that this second temple appears to be almost a construction by itself, which had no outer enclosing wall. Much important evidence is furnished by the aspect of its front portion. Ooh! Have a good one, Steve. I love you, dude. I'll see you soon. The Edfu account indicates that the nucleus of this temple was formed by an enclosure of 110 cubits by 90 cubits, but does not explain to what real entity these dimensions apply, whether it was an enclosure or a temple. Moreover, no allusion is made to the foundation episodes which must have existed at that period. The account does not even include the description of the organization of the inner part of the structure. On the contrary, the part of the account which has survived in the Edfu inscriptions seems to be concerned with the planning the front part, which is a WD little parenthesis HNT. This word HNT occurs twice in the text. Only in the second instance is it accompanied by the name place for piercing, whilst in the first instance we read the suffix s. We conjecture that there is an allusion to a mythical place named Place of Piercing, in which a mansion was founded, since the feminine suffix applies to this construction. The name of the mythical locality makes it quite clear that there was a tradition that in any place the sun god arrived at, he had to fight against the snake. After the enemy snake was overthrown, only then was the sun god believed to be able to settle down and found his temple. It is likely that this mansion, too, was created on a ground which became sacred by virtue of the fight. In its elementary aspect, this mansion might resemble the main constituent unit of the Great Temple, since we are told that its overall dimensions were 90 by 110 cubits. This enclosure probably contained one or two sanctuaries of the type SH, eventually erected in its northernmost part. Then, after a certain time, another structure was made at its front. Two halls seem to have been added, one being 15 by 50 cubits, the other 45 by 5 cubits. A construction which was in all 60 by 50 cubits does not seem to fit easily into the plan of the great temple of the sun god. This itself is an argument in favor of the theory that this account records a part of the history of another mythical temple of the sun god. The eventual connection of with the great temple of the sun god is not defined in the text. It may be suggested that this enclosure may have been erected in the vicinity of a great temple. It might eventually represent a reconstruction of a part of the earlier building, or an additional structure erected at the front of the south wall of the great temple. As against this, it should be borne in mind that this enclosure as a whole is defined as an HWT NTR. Therefore, it must have been an entirely independent construction. It may also be surmised that this enclosure was even earlier than the Great Temple because it shows a much simpler construction. The text refers neither to an outer enclosure nor to other sacred buildings, which might have been connected with this type of temple. This interpretation is, however, eliminated by the fact that the history of the temple does not show any connection with the orders of creation which can be discerned in the history of the great solar temple. Inclined to the opinion that this account discloses the Egyptian theory on the origin of the derivative mansions of the sun god, which were created later in the mythical age after the main temple was completed. Stressing the significance of the name place for piercing, we may imagine that the Egyptians believed that the sun god, after spending some time in the main temple, departed for a journey through the mythical world. In any place in which he and his company of gods fought against the enemies, an enclosure was founded in commemoration of their victory. Whenever the enemy had been killed, the battlefield was purified and another temple was founded. And each new temple imitated in its appearance the elementary structure which was made in the original place for crushing. Thus, the earliest constituent element in the creation of the solar temple, the IFDW, with the sanctuary occupying a space of 90 by 110 cubits, came to be the essential unit of the derivative mansions of the sun god. These buildings, being originally simple courtyards, might have developed later. Other structures might have been erected in front, and this seems to be the moment of the primeval age to which the short account incorporated in the fifth record alludes. Apparently, there were interpretations of these mentions of the sun god, which do not, however, survive in the Edfu records. These describe only the ultimate stage of their development, which seems to have been the planning and constructing of their front part, an era in the history of the Egyptian temple which resulted in a new type of temple. A further argument in support of the theory that the myth about the origin of the solar temples deals with more than one temple is the fact that the final name of this currently later temple was the Mansion of Misnit, which is MS-NHT. This name does not occur in the account of the origin of the Great Temple. The Edfu tradition concerning the origin of the temple of the sun god involves, therefore, the foundation of two temples. The first of these was a large building of 240 by 110 cubits, made up of 3 units, each of which was a entity in itself. This building stood in a vast enclosure of 300 by 400 cubits. The second type of temple was much simpler in aspect and was in its overall dimensions 170 by 90 cubits. There is, of course, no shred of evidence that any of these temples described in the Edfu records as the primeval temples of the sun god ever functioned as the earliest places of worship of Re, nor is there any evidence of the existence of such an early temple near Heliopolis. I like that word, Heliopolis. The type of the house of the god, said to be that of the sun god, started, therefore, with the erection of the outer enclosure, INB. This seems to be the specific feature of the constructions erected in the secondary paylands. It is entirely clear from the Edfu account that in the pattern of the original building, the outer enclosure, I and B, was the last to be constructed. This circumstance seems to confirm that the history of the solar temples was, let me try that again. This circumstance seems to confirm that in the history of the solar temples, we have a later type of sacred building which was constructed about that time, or somewhat later, after the original type of the temple reached its final stage of evolution. A further argument to support our theory can be seen in the fact that the accounts of the solar temples show clearly that these mansions were founded near to another sacred place which had already been constructed. Moreover, the organization of the interior of the later mansions manifests a distinctly different conception. Although there are connections in the main structural features of the organization, these later mansions are, strictly speaking, different in type, plan, and tradition. Their foundation was most probably influenced by religious ideas other than those involved in the origin of the Temple of the Falcon, because the site of these temples was the place in which the god fought with and defeated his enemy, and on which, after it had been purified, he settled down in the company of the ancestor god and the creators. We have no doubt that the accounts which have survived in the Edfu redaction cover a very long period of development. This fact is apparent when we give more attention to the type of the main sanctuary within the enclosure, and to the question of whether this sanctuary was erected before any other buildings on the site or subsequently to the construction of the outer enclosure. In the second manner of building a temple, we clearly see constructions of a much later date, but surely they were structures made during the pre-dynastic time, since the only materials that can be postulated were reeds. As for the mansion of Misnit, the text discloses a tradition unknown from other narratives and tells us that the sun god did not dwell there alone, but with the company of deities. Since at that stage of the mythical age, the only divine beings who were said to have been present were the creators of the sacred places and temples, we conclude that they were the companions of the sun god in his house. It would follow that when the creation of sacred places and temples came to an end, the Egyptians believed that all the deities who were engaged in the creation assembled and made their home in the temple which was created last. The mansion of Misnit seems to have been regarded as their final resting place, and this view finds confirmation in one of the subsidiary names of this temple. It bore the name the Domain of the Gods, which is NIWTNTRW. The word NTRW, or gods, probably refers to all the groups of the creators. The Heliopolitan tradition does not know of a temple near Heliopolis in which Re resided, together with the creators of the earth. It is therefore suggested that the name of Re replaced the name of the deity to whom this enclosure was primarily sacred. Perhaps the memory of a primitive temple in which the creators of the earth were adored survives in this. The tradition might have been assimilated by Heliopolis later in historical times. No equivalent can be quoted from the Hermopolitan tradition either. These trends of thought are foreign to the Hermopolitan tradition concerning the origin of the Temple of Re. As has been said, the Hermopolitan doctrine has no claim to interpret the circumstances under which the first Temple of Re was created, and to describe its growth and physical appearance. The traditions to which we have referred in this discussion seem to indicate that in the background of this myth of creation are the beliefs of a single region. Boom! And that was chapter 14. And I'm going to call it right there. My bandmate Corey is performing tonight with his other band, and I want to go make an appearance and check it out and support him. So dang, everyone, happy Friday. Happy whenever you find this. I appreciate you so much. And yeah, I will likely be back this weekend, but the next time I go live, I'm going to go live with The Path of Alchemy. So thank you for joining me. And thank you, YouTube. Thank you, StreamYard. Thank you, family. Thank you, God. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Maria. First super sticker. Holy majoli. What? So yeah, mwah. Take care of yourselves. Be safe tonight out in the world if you happen to go and celebrate. And I'll see you sooner than later. Thank you.